Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an instructive game to share with you from round 5 of the Prague International Chess Festival. This was played just today. On the white end, Sam Shankland playing against Wei Yi. Alright, the pawn play in particular with this one in the middle game really stood out to me. A couple key moments in this one, both players going into some deep thinks. On board, we have the Nimzo-Indian Defense, and with G3, this is the Romanishin variation. Let's get a few more developing moves in here. Black ends up collecting a pawn, takes here on C4, and drops the knight on C6. Now, C-pawn is obstructed, but this is only a very temporary pit stop for the knight. Has its eye in A5 if there's ever pressure on this pawn. Black's at least putting up some fight, trying to hang on to the pawn, make white work a little bit harder to get the pawn. Bishop questioned in this game. Bishop for knight exchange. Couple imbalances to speak of. Minor piece. And also the structure. Majority for white in the center. Majority for black on the queenside. This unopposed dark square bishop is put to work right away in this game. What are we doing about this pin? So here are the key moments in this middle game, key pawn moves coming up. We have here c5, and the response here is e4. Now, if white bites here, captures on c5, that's going to free us up. Black can exchange queens, and there's no longer a pin. Knight e4 to follow. Hitting a lot of stuff. Calls that around even. White's not going to be so quick to take like this. He plays with his majority. e4 on board. Nearby, there's e5. Follow up from here, h6. Bishop h4. Now what? Key moment here. Let me throw this one to you as a pop quiz. How would you respond here? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, top move played in the game, e5. Now, what might be tempting is to address this pin by playing g5, but this would be a losing attempt by black. There'd be a piece sacrifice, and now there wouldn't be a great way out of this pin. This is a really irritating pinning piece, unopposed dark square bishop. Throwing the knight in a pin. How do you get out of this? There isn't a good answer to that. If you try e5 here, this is an important pawn configuration to be familiar with. This trio will take over this e5 pawn one way or the other. A white pawn will arrive on e5 shortly. Chop in either direction, who cares? e5 is there. And if you sit, it's just going to be captured. So, this would not be a good move, g5. Top move in the game, e5. Now, a big thing here for Shankland, spent about 30 minutes, decided here on bishop captures knight. What other options does white have here? This is considered a top move in the end. If we look at some other moves, if you're capturing on e5 here, that would not be good. Be even worse than the earlier variation where there was the capture on c5. Yep, you could go ahead and exchange queens here, and unlike that earlier follow-up where the knight moved to e4, well, in this case, you're collecting a pawn on your way to e4. So this would be a winning position here for Team Black. Not a good idea to meet e5 with the capture on e5. Also, if you capture with a knight, now this is where black could respond with g5 straight away, or maybe first take on d4 with the idea of g5. Is white prepared to play this position here? It calls this one about even. You really want to play down the piece? Maybe not. So, anything else to touch on? One other move. Structural change here. Suppose white plays d5. Connected passer. If you play in this way, there's bishop g4, and what we're soon going to have here is the exchange of bishop and knight, dark square bishop and knight, because right around the corner we're going to take, we have g5 trapping the bishop. Pretty much have to go in for something like this, just getting these particular exchanges in. This would not be a good position here for white. Black's up the pawn and has a fantastic outpost here for the knight. You could think about b5 and this dream square d6. So trying to establish a connected passed pawn, not a good idea either. At the end of the day, it is bishop captures knight, queen captures bishop, and white's follow-up here ends up being the blunder of the game. White plays queen a4 here. It seems natural enough. You're developing, throwing a punch, pressure on a couple points. The top moves here, we're going to see why queen a4 is a blunder. Black follows up in an excellent way. What other moves are there here? The top moves are the captures on e5, pawn or knight. It's looking at pawn takes, queen to these two, queen d6 to follow. Okay. If we look at knight takes on e5, this one is a bit more complicated. We could have some knight jump into b3, followed up with this capture on d4, both sides in the end playing with these passed pawns. Sharp position ahead. All right, how it plays out in this one, we see queen a4, knight hops into b3, and white's response here is knight takes e5. So he's prepared to play down the exchange. Black, however, does not respond to this knight takes e5 move with the capture here of the rook. Finds a different path forward. It spends a good chunk of time in this position here, about 44 minutes spent by black here. Why doesn't white, rather than this capture on e5, move the rook? Well, if you move the rook, a simple continuation here for black would be to chop here on d4, get out of the line of fire on e5, and then follow up with this irritating pin. There isn't really a good response here by white. If you try to disrupt the queen with, let's say, e5, she steps up, pin is still there. If you try to hit the queen again, she could enter here and be super invasive, defending the passed pawn. The knight is out of bounds. At the end, the rook is still under fire. That'll be a winning position still for black. So, in short, it's not really appealing here to respond to this threat. White has a different idea in mind, hops in the center, swipes the pawn. Black does not take the rook here. 44 minutes, again, spent at this point, plays the best move, develops the bishop here to e6. Now, if you go in for this, it's still considered winning. What did maybe Shankland have his eye on with a variation like this? Let's say we get these captures in here, and then follow up with bishop to e6. This turns out to not be a top move. It's looking at b5 and then bishop a6 as an only move that keeps it a winning position for black, hanging on to that c4 pawn, queen controlling that post on a6. If you try something different, I want to give you at least a feel for where some form of compensation would be for white. Move like f4. Knight is supported with the f-pawn, and nearby, white could start thinking about rolling with this central majority, this passed d-pawn. So even though in the computer's eyes it's saying, yeah, it's still going to be winning for black, for humans, not so easy to maybe convert this one. Still a sharp game ahead. Now, how black plays it, he does not go in for this exchange, does not chop on a1. He plays bishop to e6 after 44 minutes. Follow up, rook a to d1. Now we have the capture on d4. Follow up from here is knight takes c4. If you simply recapture, there's knight takes d4, swiping the defense of the knight. How might this look? Rook takes knight, queen takes knight. Black's up the pawn. Black has a passer. Terrible position, winning position here for black. Okay. White's try in this position is knight takes c4. Now, top follow-up move, very sharp play. Fantastic way to activate a rook. b5 with tempo. You got to take. What other option do you have here? If you take the knight, there's going to be bishop takes knight. You get the knight right back and land a fork. Could actually take this particular line out a little deeper. A line like this, it may seem like, hang on, isn't white maybe getting that material back with this bishop unleashed on the rook? At the end of this line, there is bishop to e2. Rook is hit. Something like this, we save the queen. Problem here, problem there. This is a winning position for Team Black. So white does not respond to b5 here with queen captures knight. It's queen takes pawn. Rook a to b8. Gets there with tempo. Knight is secure. Out of any tricks along this main diagonal. Follow up queen a4. Now we get the capture on c3. And who's going to stop this passer? There's no comparing these two pawns. The difference with the structure, it's c pawn versus e pawn. The c pawn is passed. The e pawn is not. Once it gets to c2, there's no stopping it from getting to c1. What is white's try from here? The knight controls that promotion square. The try here is with e5, queen e7, and now the knight hops into d6. What other try is there for white? If you try and prevent this pawn from getting to c2 with, let's say, bishop e4, there's knight c5. There's a problem here with the queen. There's a fork. She already has one responsibility. You can't move the queen and defend these two. Queen c2 hangs the knight. Also, if white tries, let's say, knight e3, holding up the pawn advance. Here's one continuation, knight d2, hitting the rook. And after it moves, a slick move here with bishop b3, landing a fork. Black will win some material. So the try in this game, white responds to queen e7 with knight d6. Pawn runs. Rook goes to e1. And the follow-up, these next couple moves, kind of interesting. Rook f to c8. The knight could swipe the rook. That's what we see. What other try is there? There isn't really a great try. White's follow-up is to also put the rook in a spot where the knight could capture it. Otherwise, the pawn is pushing through, so rook to c1. We're exchanging rooks and knights with those last two moves. And there's no taming this passed pawn a step away from promotion land. Queen goes back home. Couple ideas in mind, d2, maybe d1. If available, it's not available just yet. White's try from here is with queen b5. What other option is there? If you maybe try to get the bishop involved, there's queen d2. Now if you move the rook, the pawn advances. And if you try something like queen f4, you could exchange the queens, and this is going to be winning for black. This is one path, bishop f5, hang on to the pawn. And next up, rook b8 to b1. If the king steps over, trying to combat that idea, just in the nick of time. There's also these ideas, rook c3, just going hunting for some material. Play with the a passed a pawn as well. So this won't be a defense either for Team White. Bishop f3, and then queen f4. The try here is with queen b5, queen d1 check, queen f1, and after rook to d8, White resigns. You're going to have to give material shortly. What are your options here as White? If you're capturing here, we're just chopping away. We're going to be up a rook in the end. Any other try, if bishop f3, you could take the bishop. Simple enough. And there really isn't anything more to touch on. I guess maybe if h4 is played here, simplest would be to take the rook. And after the queen recaptures, there we go. Rook gets to d1, and we are winning here as well. All right, but in this one, we only go as far as this rook taking a step over to d8, and White resigns. So, what did you think of this one? Some interesting middle game pawn play, I thought, with this one. Feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.